All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I appreciate it. And I really appreciate our speakers taking their time out of their day today to give us some guidance on this, because it's going to be about the SBA relief efforts and funding options. And I will say they are definitely expert category. So I'm going to welcome Cardinal Capital with Rob Powell, Gary Anderson, and Chris Reed. And I appreciate y'all being here. So I will turn it over to you, and then we'll come back around with any questions or something, but we'll give y'all the floor. So thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you, Christina. We appreciate this opportunity. As you can imagine, the SBA guidance is very fluid and happening literally by the hours. We've just gotten a few updates as of this morning, which we'll share with you. Also, we are Cardinal Capital, the three of us, Gary Anderson, Chris Reed, myself, Rob Powell. You can see our bios on our website. If you scroll down, they're there. And we're not going to bore you with that. You can take a look at that on your own time. We're based in Baton Rouge, but we work all across the United States. And our job primarily is to find capital, business capital, for businesses, for our clients. We do work for the businesses, and we go out across the country and seek out capital to be deployed within for our clients, so they can use it for whatever reason they need. We package those deals, and then we go shop those deals for the best available capital out there. Now, we use hundreds of tools out there. Whether it be traditional loans, bridge loans, or what we call peer loans, and mezzanine funding, you name it, we go out there and get it. We use, of course, SBA, non-SBA tools. We talk to banks quite a bit. We also talk to non-bank entities or non-depository entities, which includes insurance funds, pension funds, and the like. So we are all over the place finding money for our clients. And when we take on a client, we also operate somewhat of a consultant to them and trying to get their business to where it is to a fundable level. So that's in essence us. But like I said, there's been a lot of noise about a new third phase of relief funding that is out there. And I just sent out a release. It went out to our email blast. It's on our social media. Anyhow, this morning around, 5:30, 6 o'clock. I'm going to read it to you here. Just after 11 p.m. Central Standard Time, the U.S. Senate announced an agreement on almost $2 trillion in economic recovery plan. The bill text, which is roughly 1,000 pages, and vote should come shortly after noon Eastern Time. Today, March 25th, that's 11 o'clock Central Time. Then it goes to the House for debate and vote prior to sending it to the president's desk. We expect this to occur later this week, it to be signed, although there are calls for it to happen today. There's quite a few operational issues that need to be ironed out here. However, here's what we do know. There's $150 billion for local and state governments, $130 billion for hospitals and healthcare workers. There's a $500 billion fund set up with $425 billion for the Federal Reserve to leverage loans in order to help broad groups of distressed companies, $75 billion for industry-specific loans. Now, oversight of these funds is in the form of an inspector general and a 5-person panel to be appointed by Congress. Companies that accept monies must also agree to halt any stock buybacks for the length of the government assistance, plus an additional year. Now, another interesting piece of this is they have a provision in there that blocks senior government officials, meaning all cabinet officials, and it goes down a couple of tiers, and their family members from receiving any of this money. Now, for the Small Business Association, there's $350 billion to establish a lending program for small businesses. These are only for those who have kept payroll steady through the crisis. And we have a lot of questions about that, but that'll come out soon. Small businesses that pledge to keep their workers would also receive a cash flow assistance structured as a federally guaranteed loan. And if the employers continue to pay their workers for the duration of this crisis, those loans would be forgiven. So the federal government is basically underwriting you keeping people employed. Now, there's also going to be unemployment insurance that's extended by 13 weeks and includes a 4-month enhancement of benefits. And there's the $1,200 in direct payments to be rushed to individuals, $2,400 for couples that would apply equally to workers with incomes up to $75,000 a year, phasing out and ending altogether for those earning more than $99,000. Families would receive $500 per child. Now, that's a big mouthful. All of this is in writing on our website. We have a blog post for that. Just go to cardinalcap.net and you will find all of that. Or you can sign up for our email and we'll be, all of that will be delivered straight to you. So there it is. And stay in touch with us and we'll keep you up to date. So we're going to go on. That's the latest and greatest. We're going to go on here and I believe Chris is going to talk to you a little bit more.
Currently, right now, what we have in play are direct lending loans through the SBA. Those are SBA disaster loans. Those loans are a 30-year term. The interest rate is fixed over that term. Right now, the interest rates haven't really been too well defined, but what we can tell you is they're somewhere between 2.75% and 3.75% to a maximum of $2 million. And these are to cover basically economic loss during the disaster. So contracts that are missing, whatever that can be, proven that it was a true economic loss would be covered, as well as covering payroll and other fixed overhead expenses over that period of time. So now then, the challenge to these loans is this: at what point does the economic loss end? Nobody knows. As it stands today, the SBA has forgiven current SBA disaster loan payments, or I don't want to say forgiven, but have deferred them. So there are no more payments for current SBA disaster loans between now and the end of the year. So does that mean you would automatically assume that you could apply to cover overhead and whatnot to the end of the year? We don't know. We also know that there was some talk about the country trying to get back to normal as late as August. Don't know that either. So that's kind of the challenge right now with these loans that are currently coming through. It doesn't really cover so much lost revenue to an extent. It's basically payroll, overhead, and other items. There's some additional SBA lending that is going to be hopefully coming through that Rob spoke about earlier, that basically the White House and the Senate have agreed upon. It's that legislation currently has to make it through the Senate and then on to the House, where we don't know quite what's going to happen once it gets to the House. But that's the current SBA disaster loan that is available, and Louisiana is open for business as far as accepting those applications. What we do know is that past history has taught us that during the Great Flood of 2016, it took an average of 5 months for a lot of people to get through the process. Do we think the process will be faster under this one? We don't know. That was a regional disaster. This is a nationwide disaster, and the SBA is currently going through that. There's currently that's the direct side of the SBA. There's the indirect side, and the legislation that Rob was talking about was the expansion of SBA 7A. What we know that's been proposed as far as the expansion of SBA 7A loans, which are more of the traditional loans that SBA lenders, banks, non-bank lenders offer, is that the maximum loan amount would go from $5 million to $10 million. The guarantee amount would go from 80% guaranteed to anywhere between 90 to 100%. We feel that 90 is probably what's going to get passed. 100% guaranteed loan. Those loans have little value on the secondary market because the banks do sell them as a bond. And so as a result, we don't feel that the secondary market would assume those loans or buy those loans. So therefore, we feel a 90% guarantee is probably where it's going to fall. In addition to that, the interest rate, instead of the 2 3/4 to 3 3/4 fixed over a 30-year of the disaster loan, it's going to be more of a traditional SBA loan where traditional working capital, equipment, those types of things would be over a 10-year period at Wall Street Journal Prime, anywhere between 2.5 to 2 3/4%, and that's based off of the lender and what they would do. There are certain fees that would also be a part of SBA loans as you would go through more of a traditional bank. Those fees are being waived at this time, and so that is also good news as it reduces the cost. And then finally, from there, what we're hearing is that these updated SBA 7A loans could have anywhere between a 90-day to 180-day deferred payment period. So 3 months to 6 months of deferred payments, and those payments would be spread out over the term of the loan. So we're looking forward to seeing what comes out of the Senate. And quite frankly, I think most of the people are going to be ending up going more that 7A route than the SBA disaster loan. What we do know today is that if you take money through the SBA disaster loan, you would not be able to take money through the expansion of the 7A program. That has been released by the SBA. However, there's no expansion of the 7A program. So I'd highly recommend everyone go ahead and apply for the SBA disaster assistance, see what that comes back, and then compare that to what would be available through 7A. Gary? Yeah.
Gary,
Hey,
to help you out here? I think both of y'all can probably tag team this.
yeah, Gary, if
Yeah.
you could go ahead and go through, kind of what we've got right now with getting the books in order and everything else.
Okay, let me point out that 7A and 504 loans are still available. Those are for new business expansion and refinance, not just for disaster. So if you're doing anything beyond covering disaster costs, you've got to go the 7A or 504 route. So now in the getting an application going, you have to go to for the disaster loans, you have to go to the website. Presently, that is the only way to do it. There is discussion of having commercial banks and non-bank lenders able to do the disaster loans, which would be a great help because the SBA is already overloaded. I talked to an SBA representative yesterday, and he said that they are jammed. If you want to get online with them, do it between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. Don't even try during the day because you're not going to be able to get on. He said they've been jammed for 3 weeks already. So they're going to have a problem getting loans out, even if everything's completed properly. Now, get your books in order. You're going to have certain documents. At a minimum, it shows on here, you're going to have the completed application, which is online. The SBA Form 5 is actually online. You fill that out online. 4506T is where you authorize the IRS to give your tax returns to the SBA. For everybody in the company who owns 20% or more of the business, you're going to have to do this. So if mom and dad own half, you got to get them to sign. If they own more than 20%, they're also going to have to agree to the note and guarantee the note. You're also going to need complete copies of the latest federal tax returns. They're probably going to want 3 years. I think 1 year is required right up front. Then you're going to have to also complete an SBA Form 413. That is the SBA's personal financial statement. Do not skip things. If you think it's just a little amount and it doesn't really matter, anything you leave off of there that you actually own is considered bank fraud. So don't do that. And on the liability side, get your own credit report ahead of time. Take a look at it. Make sure that everything that's on your credit report is also shown as a liability on your 413. They're going to check that. Got to make sure everything is correct on there. The scheduled liabilities, the SBA form 2202 refers to liabilities of the business. What do they owe? That includes leases, so that needs to be included on there. One of the biggest things that we see, though, is that people's balance sheet and income statement are not very well done. You would be well advised to go over your balance sheet with your accountant or CPA as part of this. What you need to look for on there that we see all the time is negative liabilities. That means somebody owes you money. Usually it's an accounting error. They really don't owe you the money. So look at some of those kind of things, make sure that they make sense. When you do apply for this, they're going to want collateral if the loan is over $25,000. They don't necessarily require full collateral coverage in a disaster loan, but they do want collateral. That will, in every case that I am aware of, require a second mortgage on your residence. So be prepared for that. It is basically non-negotiable. In doing our disaster loan through the flood, I prepared my wife for this. I made sure she knew she was going to have to sign something that said that there was a second mortgage on our house. So make sure that is gone over with everybody involved, and that also applies to everybody with a 20% or more 20% or more ownership. So good accounting records will help a lot in doing all of this. Make sure that you fill out all the forms completely. It will slow things down if you don't. And as part of even the disaster loans, the SBA requires that you show the ability to repay these loans. So your credit score will matter. If you have problems there, try to get them fixed ahead of time. If not, put together what's called a cry letter. And you're going to have to, in many cases, have projections that show how you're going to be able to make those payments, and they need to be well explained, and they've got to be reasonable. So that's kind of the basics for applying for a disaster loan online. We're hoping that very shortly there will be an additional 10,000 plus locations where you can apply for those, because we're hoping that they will allow bank and non-bank lenders that are already SBA lenders to accept those applications and underwrite them. If so, that will relieve the logjam massively. But again, in the 16 floods, the average length of time it took to get a check after application was 5 months. So there are an awful lot of businesses that don't have 5 months worth of payroll or et cetera, stacked away just waiting to be paid. So it's going to be a mess. It's going to be a mess for a while. I don't know how they're going to deal with the requirement that you keep your payroll going when nobody's got the money to do that, unless you can catch up. But that's a lot of stuff that we're going to find out in the future, because they've got to come out with the rules and regulations and so forth. Let me see. Mark has a question. Hold on. Would it matter if somebody hasn't filed 2020 personal or business taxes yet? Excuse me, the 1990. No, because your 2019 taxes are not yet due. They are not going to be due until July. The business returns actually should have been filed, or an extension filed, on March 15th. The fact that you filed the extension should do all right there. But you are going to need the year-end financials for last year, internal financials, and you're going to need year-to-date financials for this year. So whatever you're using, QuickBooks, Peachtree, back of the envelope, whatever, you're going to have to provide those and go forward with that. So anything else?
No, I think that's pretty good, Gary. Any more questions before we move on? Okay. One thing that we've noticed, what they have been publishing is that they want to get the funding in this last bill, this $2 trillion bill. They want to get it out as soon as possible. So otherwise, it's like pushing all this stuff through a straw. It's next to impossible. And they have stated 5 to 8 weeks, but we will see. History has shown us that it does take a little bit longer. The takeaway there is the quicker you get your information in, the quicker you can get into the head of the line there. And if there is any trouble, you do need to seek some guidance from people who have done this stuff before. So, and here, let me move on here. These are just general tips when setting all of this up and going through this, this economic issue that we have here. And again, I'll state, get your books in order. Now, our smaller clients, like Gary said, some of them will write it on the back of an envelope or they have it in their head. Our larger clients have all of the books. They have everything available to them. They just have not pulled them together in a format that can be delivered to the SBA or to whatever lending institution that's, that is your audience. So get those things in order. Now, I'm going to point you in the direction of our website. We do have a blog up there that has a full list of things you need to get familiar and have at your ready. There's also a punch list on there for things that you can just check off. Yes, I've got this, this, and this. And it's fairly detailed, so you'll need to have that information available when you fill out these forms. We also have links to all of the forms to be filled out that you can take a look at your leisure. And the second thing, and we can't overestimate this, I'm a marketing guy by trade, is communications. Communicate with everybody, your employees, your vendors, your customers, debtors, and even your competitors. Everybody's in the same boat here. You'd be surprised the best practices you can learn by talking to your competitors. They will help you out, and they have wonderful resources as well. Don't be shy. Let me tell you, they're looking for answers too. And you can over-communicate to, excuse me, there's no such thing as over-communicating to your relevant publics, that being your employees and your customers. They do want to hear the status of what you're doing. Also, okay, the third thing, review contracts. Now, we all have a lot of contracts that we deal with either our vendors, our landlords, and what have you. And there are, in some cases, what's called a force majeure clause. I always have trouble pronouncing that, which in essence gives you an out if there is something that is beyond your control. And if you have that clause in there, I believe we're in a position now, or a situation where this is beyond your control. So you may be able to get some leeway with any of your debtors there. You can also go to your bank and ask for forbearance. I believe they're allowed to issue one forbearance for a certain amount of time, but have that talk with them. Also, give your insurance agent a call. It's worth it, just to see if you have any coverage under your current plan. I know there's also some subsequent bills that will be coming up that will address loss of revenue on insurance plans, but that is right now just in talking stages. And let me say also, these bills that we talk about that are coming up in the Senate and the House, when they're going through that process, this is the third phase. There will be more. As we find out and as the legislature finds out and kicks the tires on these things, they will adjust as we go forward. And then fourth, and this one sounds easy, but focus on what you can control. There's a whole lot of noise out there. And Chris and Gary and I were talking just the other day about how much disinformation or misinformation there is out there on this whole recovery and on the virus itself. Focus on what you know and what you can control. Stick with reliable sources on these things. For folks in Louisiana, that would be lobby, that would be your local chamber, us, if you will. And Chris, Gary, do you guys know other resources to go after? I mean, we're pretty, actually, those that I just mentioned, ourselves, lobby, the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, and the Chambers of Commerce, we're in direct communication with them and often trade information. So, and those are coming straight from Washington. So,
Hey, Rob, I would also list in there NFIB.
yeah, NFIB, that's right. They are a great resource for this stuff. And they can all be found online.
Now,
so, and of course, the last thing is seek guidance if you have any questions at all. This is a whole lot to capture. Most businesses, 99.9% of them are really good at doing what they do. Their widgets are really good, and they're good at delivering that. There are other people out there like us who can provide, who are good at navigating this process. We've done it before. We've got a long history here. But seek guidance. Doesn't have to be us, just as long as you find folks that are in this area. It'll make it a lot easier, and it'll make you feel better, and it'll ease a lot of the anxieties going through this. But the big takeaway here is there is relief coming. There are also some unanswered questions, but they will be answered shortly. So, keep your eyes open on that.
There is one thing I want to mention. One area of business that is not currently covered under any of the packages that we have just discussed, and that is rental property and investment property. So owners of retail strip centers, owners of apartment complexes, and even owners of office buildings. Right now, none of those people are covered in any of the recovery bills. And we know that that's going to need to be addressed because we see it across the board. Right now, that particular category is not. That is not an SBA lendable item under SBA 7A or 504 unless the business owner occupies 51% or more of the building. So we know that there's going to be some recovery measures more than likely coming out from HUD and other items to help those people keep their properties and not getting foreclosed on and then sending a bunch of renters out into the streets. So we know that that has to come, but right now that's a category that's missed. We also know that there are several other items that are going to come about as well. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how all of this plays out into getting America back online and heading back to recovery once again to basically put us back where we were. So
whatever you do, keep your lenders informed. Talk to your mortgage companies, talk to your banks, talk to your credit cards. If things are going to be a little bit slow, just let them know. Trust me, they know it's coming, but it's a whole lot better if you talk to them, let them know up front. Forbearance, again, there is that possibility, but don't jump into it too quick. Just talk to them first. Forbearance is a technical process, and once they have granted it, that's usually the only time they will. So just see if they'll live with you for a while before you go ask for forbearance. That's just from history. Make sure you don't burn all your ammunition up front. So
good point, Gary.
Good luck.
Christina, you got anything?
I did want to ask, like I said, that was great information, a lot to take in. And I don't know if we addressed this or if this is kind of even part of the conversation right now, but our insurance policies kicking in right now, is there something, is that another route that people should be looking at as far as their financial situation?
You can look at it. There's a 99.9% chance you do not have coverage for an economic injury like this. Almost all casualty insurance policies, which is what you're talking about, deal with casualties. There has to be an outside physical event that occurs that causes it. Having been in the insurance business for 30 plus years, it's very seldom that a small business is going to have anything that covers any of this. But ask the question. See what's there.
It's worthwhile giving them a call, your agent a call.
You may have
This is up
accidentally
there.
gotten that coverage.
What's that?
You may have accidentally gotten that coverage.
Yeah, I put this up there next to the zombie apocalypse coverage. It's
no
you know, it's an unforeseen issue. So yeah.
Hey, this is Mark. I do have a question concerning the SBA loan process, and to what extent, I mean, you know, we're kind of, you know, from a business standpoint in terms of, you know, cash flow in the regular business cycle, you know, a lot of small businesses may not have felt this yet, but they know that they will feel this. They know what's coming. To what extent do you have to demonstrate economic loss? Or what do you have to go through to demonstrate that, I guess is what I'm saying.
The answer to that is kind of in the language of some of this legislation. Hang on, let me look at it here real quick.
Mark?
It says you're going to be able to get, let's see, working capital, payments on fixed debt, accounts payable, payroll, which includes taxes and benefits, and other fixed expenses. So that kind of tells you that what they're going to cover going forward, looking forward, not having necessarily to justify what you've already been billed for, is those things that you can say, look, I've been paying this much rent or this much mortgage payment for the last year. It's going to go forward. I've paid this as an average amount of utilities going forward. Let's throw that in there. This has been my payroll on the average for the last 12 months. So let's throw that in there. So you're going to have to prove it from past records going forward, but it does not include any money for expansion, new equipment, you know, new software, nothing new. This is strictly looking back.
It also does not cover lost revenue.
Right. So it's not even looking at revenue. What it's saying is we're going to help you cover these fixed expenses, which generally known as overhead. It's what I call Christmas Day expenses. It's the expenses in your business that go on Christmas Day when nobody's working. Rent, utilities, insurance. Okay. So those kind of things you're going to be able to throw into this and say, I need 6 months of coverage on this.
Okay. So I guess,
Mark, this is Chris Reed. Let me kind of go back to your question a little bit. How do I prove injury? For those of us in South Louisiana who can remember the BP spill of 2010, it's the same way of going back and getting those BP credits from back in the day. You had to show that there was a loss of revenue over the period of time year over year. So if you take a look at March 2019 compared to March 2020, if there's a reduction in revenue, then you can sit there and say, I was injured. Or even going back to February and January to an extent and saying, I was injured. On a go-forward basis, you can estimate the injury. But here's one of the questions that has come up in the statement that I made earlier, which is, at what point does the injury end? So some businesses, which we have clients who lag a month to 2 months behind the cycle, going into something like this, they will also lag 2 to 3 months coming out of the cycle. So when everybody else is recovered, they're lagging 2 to 3 months back. So it's trying to go through and really, I hate to say this, it's I don't even know if it's a swag. I think it's kind of a wag. And I would go in and apply for what you can, and then you get what you get and kind of don't pitch a fit type scenario on the back end, because we really don't know when the end date is. And for a lot of companies, maybe yours, you might lag a month to 2 months of doing well, and then all of a sudden it's going to slip off fairly dramatically.
Yeah, that was really my my concern, I suppose, and I suppose a lot of people are in this. I mean, kind of, in my business, kind of pretty much go by my month-to-month billings.
That's correct.
So in March is when, I basically get paid for February. This wasn't really that much of an issue in February. So on one hand, I'm hearing you need to go ahead and do this as soon as possible. On the other hand, I'm looking, well, how can I even demonstrate right now? I mean, like from this point going back, how can I demonstrate that I've been impacted? And I think what I hear y'all saying is you just need to kind of, estimate going forward, how are you going to be impacted? So the WAG, I think, may be appropriate.
Well, it's a situation of, by the time the SBA goes around and reviewing your application and start getting the documents and everything needed, it's at that point you could really begin to start feeling the pinch, but you're already in the system of the process, and you can, quote unquote, move the goal line a little bit to your advantage. One other thing I want to kind of add to this, going back to insurance, most people pay their business insurance on a monthly basis. The easiest way to save 10 to 20% on your insurance premiums, pay it annually. You actually finance your insurance over that period of time. So if you can, and through this overhead, get enough money to cover those premiums, you might be looking at, a reduction in premium. And if things come back around, you may be able to pay those premiums on an annualized basis and save yourself 10 to 20% and kind of get off the treadmill of having to pay those premiums on a monthly basis. So that could be one, I don't want to call it silver lining, but it might be an opportunity for a business to save a few bucks. Anybody with any other questions?
Now, I just want to clarify, not the financial person here, so this might come across as a dumb question, but you're saying that you cannot file for lost revenue and you can for payroll. So for single member LLCs, let's put that in particular, would payroll count as the owner's draw? Is that what you count as payroll?
That right now is one of the questions that's up in the air.
Okay. All right. So I feel like it wasn't a dumb question.
No, it's not.
No.
Question that millions of people are asking themselves right now, because they're in that position. We're in that position. So, and as you are. So, yeah. How do you justify that? It's not payroll. It's a draw. You pay on a Schedule C at the end of the year.
Right. So that's still an unanswered question as of right now.
Which is the bane of every existing government program that there is. So,
but to the extent of
details later.
But you can obviously look at what even if you only have one person on the payroll, if you do have actual payroll, where your business is, paying Social Security, Medicare each month, that monthly expense, that's the one thing, that's one thing that they would help you with. And does it matter if it's your business and you're the only one who's on the payroll?
That's
right.
The question is, we don't know. If you actually are paying yourself on a payroll basis, right, and doing monthly payments, regular, with deductions and all that kind of good stuff, yeah, go ahead, go for it, file it. If you're
But the
on a
question
draw.
that we don't know about is the owner draw, which
Right.
is basically the profit that your company makes if you're a
Right.
through.
So if you're taking $1,000 a week as a draw, or as an normal payment, and then taking the rest of it as profit at the end of the year, how do you treat that profit at the end of the year versus the grand a week that you're taking? So,
Right.
Yeah.
Now,
So many questions. Good
the
one.
advice I would give at this point is to get into the pipeline early.
Yeah.
And let the SBA sort it out on the backside, because if you wait, just as Gary said earlier, the system's being overloaded. And so the best time to get into this is at night. It kind of reminds me of my LSU class scheduling days, where I'd have to wake up at 3 in the morning or 2 in the morning coming in from whatever to schedule classes back in the day. It's the same thing with the sites getting overloaded. So what I would say is those absence of draws or the reduction of draws, I would absolutely include those. Some of the things as a solo entrepreneur or single member LLC, or even a small partnership like Cardinal Capital, is what do you do if you have personal payments coming out? Let's say you were, car reimbursements or things like that. How is all that handled? And it can be a little bit of a challenge. The other thing I can tell you that's going to be a challenge, if you are using personal credit cards to cover your business during this time of need, use one card. It's going to be very, very different. It's very difficult for a lender, especially if you have to go to a more traditional bank lender to cover out versus these direct SBA loans. The bank lender can't tell the difference between when you filled up your boat full of gas at Costco or your car full of gas at Costco or your wife, spouse, significant other's car at Costco. So whenever these things start to come in, trying to sort out on a personal credit card what is a business expense, what is a personal expense, gets very, very tedious. If you are doing that, keep every receipt, mark the receipt as to what you did, and try to provide as much information and documentation as possible. That, for Cardinal, is one of our biggest challenges when dealing with young entrepreneurs or businesses that are early stage, where the owner used their personal credit to help start and perpetuate the business. And then all of a sudden they've run up some significant credit card debt and they want to get a business loan to refinance that debt. Well, it's under Chris Reed personally, not under Cardinal Capital. How is this a business loan again? And so it's very difficult to prove those things.
I see. And I'll throw this question out there. We'll kind of wrap up in a second. I know we're kind of bombarding you with questions, but I don't think we really touched upon this, but what do you think the lending landscape is going to look like coming out of this? We're talking about, Rob's already giggling. We're talking about government, government programs right now, but what do you think?
Well, one of the things that the Fed announced, I believe was it yesterday or the day before, they are going to loosen up some of the restrictions that are currently being placed on, and I'm using layman's terms here because that's frankly how I understand it. They're going to loosen up some of the restrictions on banks to loan. Okay, so that is one thing. They do realize that this will change the landscape, if you will, the lending landscape for businesses out there. So they have put in a few tools, and they've made some noise that there are other tools that they have that they will turn on if they need to, if they see this lending starting to restrict a little bit. But they've already instituted quite a bit of good stuff for the local banks to lend.
But again, this is going to be a lot of unknowns that are coming through.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody has any questions, Cardinal's here as a resource. We're going to point you in whatever direction we can, let you know which way to go. The interesting thing throughout this is going to be what happens at a bank level. We could get into a very granular conversation about commercial lending in Louisiana. for example, most commercial lenders only do one hotel loan a year. Now you can imagine the injuries that the hotel industry has seen, especially in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, other areas.
The whole hospitality field.
The whole hospitality industry. So now if you're only talking about doing one hotel loan a year per bank, I know Whitney Bank, because of the takeover of First NBC, they haven't been able to do a hotel loan in about 3 years because their portfolio is so overweighted with them. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens and where everybody goes for capital. I don't know if the state has got enough. Then you start to run into what happened in the oil and gas industry here recently. At the same time COVID-19 happened, the Saudis decided to turn on the spigot and tank oil to get the Russians to the negotiating table for OPEC. Most banks in Louisiana don't do oil and gas loans anymore. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all this landscape shakes out. And that's, quite frankly, one of the reasons why Cardinal Capital exists, is to provide that additional resource to a local, to a local person that just doesn't know that, hey, my bank has done their one hotel loan for the year and I don't know where to go, or I've got an oil and gas company and my bank said, we don't want your business anymore because we're tired of the volatility.
Yeah, shameless plug here, we do go across the country sourcing funds. So just to reiterate what we said earlier. So yeah, if you run into roadblocks, we knock those down.
Yeah, I mean, just give us a call.
I'm gonna have your work cut out for you in the next year. But
I'm trying to get the word out.
yeah, I know y'all are the guys for the job for sure. But one last question I wanted to pose before we wrap it up. But so when we're talking about what to look for in the next few weeks, we're not only looking at SBA funding, we're also looking at the Federal Reserve as well. Is that correct?
Well, the Federal Reserve deals with the banks and only with the banks. They don't deal with individual borrowers. So they will affect by dealing with the policymakers and such at the banks themselves. So the Federal Reserve affects the banking system, which then affects business lending and individual lending. SBA is more direct lending to business and individuals in the disaster loans. The the hope here is that they will widen that and allow the commercial SBA lenders, bank and non-bank, to deal in the disaster area, so that we'll have, like I said, 10,000 more places to go to at least apply for those loans. But it's going to be a mess. So.
Oh man. Well, I want to say I really appreciate y'all putting on this presentation. We have recorded it, so we are going to, excuse me, it will be up on our website, bolstercompany.com, but it will be up in Cardinal Capital's website as well, and you can see it on the screen below, cardinalcap.net. But I really appreciate y'all. I know this is a hard thing to think about for a lot of people right now. It's with the stress going on in their lives, that going into financial worry mode, I know, is a very difficult thing for a lot of people to have to face. So I know they're going to appreciate this information. If not today, it's in the back of their mind. They're going to be looking for it in the next few weeks. So like wonderful presenters mentioned, they are the ones that will go out and look for that capital for businesses. So they're a great resource, and frequently updated blog posts and social media. So definitely check that out.
Yep.
But guys, again, thank you for doing this, for being here.
Appreciate it.
Audience, appreciate it as well. Thanks again. I really appreciate it. And everyone, take care. And let me know if, just email me if you have any questions.